It was a crisp autumn morning in Boulder Hills, Colorado. The kind of day where the sun filtered softly through golden trees, and the hum of lawn sprinklers blended with the occasional bark of a dog or rustle of newspaper deliveries. At the upscale Elkhorn residences, where every balcony overlooked manicured courtyards and Tesla chargers lined the underground garage, life was steady, scheduled, predictable. Until 10:07 a.m. That's when the silence was ruptured. A single, sickening thud, followed by a chorus of car alarms that sprang to life like a pack of wild dogs. 1 second, everything was routine. The next, it was chaos. Windows slid open. Heads leaned out. Phones were already dialing 911. On the slate-gray pavement near Building C, the body of a woman lay twisted, grotesquely broken. Her head was turned at an unnatural angle. Blood pooled around her, stark against the white concrete. The scene was something out of a nightmare, but it was real. And the residents who saw it would never forget. Police and EMTs arrived within minutes. Yellow tape cordoned off the area. Officers guided shocked residents away, while others combed the scene, photographing, measuring, documenting. The woman's identity was confirmed quickly. Alyssa Morgan, age 41, a resident of apartment 2303, top floor, Tower C. She was alone when she fell. Or so it seemed. When officers made their way up to the 23rd floor, to Alyssa's apartment, they weren't expecting what they found. Inside the unit stood a man, mid-50s, pale, thin, dressed in a loose gray sweater and dark slacks. He looked shaken. Not hysterical. Not angry. Just hollow. As if someone had turned down the volume of life and left only a flicker behind his eyes. His name was Vincent Hale, and he claimed he was Alyssa's colleague at the Jefferson County Judicial Services Division. According to his account, they'd stopped by her apartment together that morning to retrieve a work file she'd forgotten. Nothing unusual. He said they chatted, stepped inside, and within moments, Alyssa walked out onto the balcony for some air. Then, he hesitated here. She leaned over the railing to enjoy the breeze and slipped. Just like that. She was gone before I could even move, he told detectives, trembling. But something about his tone didn't sit right. Detective Aaron Lowell, who had over 20 years of homicide experience, said later that she'd learned to listen not just to words, but to what was missing. And in Vincent's account, something was missing. The reaction. The panic. The sheer disbelief. What she saw instead was the practiced detachment of a man who had either rehearsed the story or had no soul left to feel it. The forensic team combed the apartment. They noted the usual things: bookshelves, tasteful art, a bottle of red wine uncorked on the counter, a faint hint of lavender in the air. But when they reached the balcony, the story began to unravel. There were scrape marks on the metal railing, fresh, horizontal, and uneven. Marks made by fingernails. Long ones. Below them, smudges of blood and skin fragments. It wasn't a slip. It was a struggle. Further inside, an overturned chair lay on its side. A glass shard glittered from the corner of the room. There were scuff marks on the hardwood floor and a single earring under the sofa. This wasn't the scene of a quiet visit. This was a war zone in disguise. Vincent, meanwhile, was taken downtown for questioning. As the hours passed, detectives began assembling a fuller picture. Alyssa Morgan wasn't just another civil servant. She was the Deputy Director of Judicial Tech Operations, a job that required precision, confidentiality, and access to sensitive case data. Vincent Hale, on the other hand, was the Deputy Director of Enforcement, a field-level post with less glamour, more grunt work, and a growing reputation for stress-induced attrition. Their departments rarely interacted professionally. So why were they here together? Alone? Investigators pulled security footage. Over the past 6 months, Vincent had been captured entering Alyssa's building more than a dozen times, several in the middle of the night. Sometimes staying for less than an hour. Sometimes longer. Sometimes multiple visits in the same day. Whatever this was, it wasn't just business. Digging deeper, the financial division flagged something strange. Multiple wire transfers totaling over $4.9 million had passed through accounts linked to Alyssa. Her base salary at the court was a modest $68,000. Where did the rest come from? Detectives turned to her digital footprint. In her personal phone, buried in a hidden folder, were photos of luxury watches, receipts for cash-only real estate purchases, and a few short video clips, covert recordings of high-level conversations, some with faces blurred, but voices unmistakable. Alyssa had been building a vault of leverage. That discovery changed everything. Now, Vincent wasn't just a grief-stricken colleague. He was a lover, a witness, a beneficiary of proximity to power, and possibly, just possibly, a murderer trying to cover his tracks before they buried him. The post-mortem confirmed what forensics had suggested. Alyssa's injuries were consistent with a forceful ejection, not an accidental fall. A strong push had sent her beyond the normal drop trajectory. The only question now was, why? Detectives didn't need to wait long. Within 24 hours of Alyssa's death, a sealed manila envelope arrived anonymously at the station. Inside was a USB drive. On it, a voice memo. Alyssa's voice. Calculating. Talking about Vincent. His desperation. His anger. His belief that he'd been used. And her warning that he might do something stupid. The case had turned. No longer just suspicious, it was premeditated. And the man who once ruled a courtroom with iron confidence now found himself cornered, outmatched, and out of time. Vincent Hale wasn't always a man of scandal. There was a time, not long ago, when his name carried weight in Jefferson County's legal circles. He was the kind of judge jurors respected, the kind lawyers prepared twice as hard for. He walked into courtrooms like they were temples, and for a while, people believed he actually belonged there. But those were different days. Before the sideways transfer. Before the divorce. Before Alyssa Morgan. Back in 1999, Hale was already making headlines. He'd been the youngest circuit judge ever appointed in the county, known for sharp sentencing and a black-and-white view of justice. There was no gray in Vincent Hale's world back then. Guilty. Innocent. Consequences. The end. Colleagues called him brilliant, meticulous, a walking statute book. But behind the scenes he was something else, restless. Vincent hated the small-town politics that dictated who got promoted, who got ignored. He was ambitious, but not political. That turned out to be a fatal flaw in a system where climbing the ladder had less to do with merit and more to do with who you played golf with. By 2015, he'd been quietly pushed aside, reassigned from courtroom duties to a bureaucratic desk job in the Enforcement Bureau. Officially, it was lateral. Everyone knew better. He went from commanding courtrooms to chasing people who ignored traffic fines and alimony payments. His title was still impressive on paper. His office, less so. That's when the cracks started to show. His marriage began unraveling. His wife, Dr. Evelyn Hale, was a rising executive at a medical technology firm in Denver. She'd once admired Vincent's sense of purpose, his conviction. But now, with him home more often, brooding, bitter, resentful, that admiration faded. Their conversations thinned. Their silences grew louder. By 2017, Evelyn moved out. A quiet separation. No drama, no scandal, just two lives moving in opposite directions. And then came Alyssa. She was younger. Beautiful in a precise, calculated kind of way. She wasn't flashy, but she commanded attention. More importantly, she knew who Vincent had been, and wasn't afraid to say it out loud. They met at a judicial tech conference hosted by the county. A low-stakes networking event. Vincent was there out of obligation. Alyssa was presenting on digitizing case archives. Their eyes met during the Q&A. He asked a question about metadata. She smiled. The rest, as they say, was inevitable. At first, it was flirtation. Then dinners. Then late nights in her apartment on the 23rd floor. Alyssa made Vincent feel like he mattered again. She remembered his landmark ruling in the Dunmore case. Quoted it. Asked how he held his ground against political pressure. For a man whose life had been slowly stripped of meaning, this felt like oxygen. But Alyssa didn't do anything without reason. She had a knack for finding men at the edge. Men who were vulnerable, angry, disappointed. And she offered them something they didn't know they needed: validation. Behind her composed demeanor, Alyssa Morgan was building something far more dangerous than relationships. She was building a network. Police discovered that she wasn't just involved with Vincent. Her phone records linked her to at least 3 other officials, one from the district attorney's office, another from the state financial crimes division, and one more from the governor's advisory board. All male. All middle-aged. All compromised. At the center of it all? Her apartment at Boulder Hills. A place paid in full, no mortgage, no loans. The title listed her name, and one other, Derek Lowen. That name raised every red flag. Lowen had served as director of Colorado State Patrol, and later as Deputy Public Safety Secretary before quietly stepping down amid whispers of financial improprieties. Nothing was ever proven. But now Lowen was back in the frame, connected by property, digital communications, and millions of dollars in silent transfers. It wasn't long before FBI financial crimes got involved. Bank reports revealed Alyssa had acted as a white glove, a middle person helping launder funds between government contractors and public officials. Her digital trail showed hundreds of encrypted messages, some discussing campaign support, others referencing sealed projects and code-named accounts. Vincent had stumbled into something far bigger than a love affair. And perhaps that's what broke him. According to a confidential source at the Enforcement Bureau, Vincent had been desperate for promotion. He'd grown tired of being invisible, of answering to judges half his age. So when Alyssa offered to put in a word, he clung to it like a lifeline. What he didn't expect was to be used. When his transfer request was rejected, again, Vincent lost his temper. He accused Alyssa of manipulating him, of lying, of playing him against the system. She didn't deny it. In fact, she told him exactly what she thought. "You were never the plan, Vince. You were just a tool. And now? You're broken." Alyssa's words weren't laced with cruelty. They were just honest. Brutally so. And for Vincent, who'd once believed he was still in control, that truth was unbearable. On September 28th, just 5 days before her death, neighbors heard shouting from apartment 2303. Male voices. Glass breaking. Silence. Then nothing. But the next day, Vincent returned to her apartment again. Alone. Security footage showed him waiting outside for 10 minutes before she let him in. That was the last time anyone saw Alyssa Morgan alive. And when she fell from that balcony, it wasn't just a woman dying. It was the collapse of a web, threads of power, secrets, corruption, all snapping at once. What Vincent didn't realize was that Alyssa had already made contingency plans. She knew she was walking a dangerous tightrope. And so she started documenting audio memos, encrypted backups, stored across multiple cloud services. She told someone everything. And the police were about to find out who. For years, Alyssa Morgan was considered a ghost in the system. Not invisible, but intentionally quiet, measured, precise. She attended meetings but rarely spoke. She answered questions but never offered more than necessary. Her work was meticulous. Her public life? Impeccably clean. But now that she was dead, her life started speaking volumes. What investigators first believed to be a simple workplace romance gone wrong quickly unraveled into a far more intricate story. A story woven with power, influence, and calculated relationships, engineered not by chaos, but by choice. Alyssa Morgan was no victim of circumstance. She was the architect. Born in upstate New York, Alyssa's early life was unremarkable. She graduated from SUNY Albany with a degree in computer science and interned with a state records office. Nothing flashy. Nothing out of place. Her co-workers described her as polite but distant. One remembered, she was the type who always watched the room before speaking. By 29, she'd relocated to Colorado and secured a position at the Jefferson County Judicial Services. At first, she was tasked with archiving case files and converting them into digital records. She worked behind the scenes, her name rarely appearing on official memos. But over the next decade, she would climb, methodically, discreetly. Her promotions never made headlines. Her performance reviews were always glowing but vague. Efficient. Adaptable. Trustworthy. She was the kind of employee who never caused problems, and somehow always ended up in rooms where the important conversations happened. What no one realized was that Alyssa wasn't just collecting documents. She was collecting people. By the time of her death, she had formed personal relationships, some romantic, some transactional, with more than a dozen influential figures in the Colorado justice system. Not just Vincent Hale, not just Derek Lowen, but assistant prosecutors, court administrators, procurement officers, individuals who controlled data, budgets, and access. Police recovered 3 encrypted phones from her apartment. On them were hundreds of voice notes and video clips. The content ranged from mundane court gossip to damning admissions of bribery, case tampering, and financial kickbacks. It became clear Alyssa had been building a blackmail archive. She recorded every deal she helped facilitate, every conversation that hinted at corruption. She documented which judge got which donation, which contractor paid for whose vacation, which law firm funneled money through which nonprofit. She had names, dates, account numbers. And Vincent Hale? He was just another line in her ledger. Investigators now understood why Alyssa never flaunted her wealth. She was smart. She didn't drive a luxury car. She didn't wear flashy jewelry. She didn't take exotic vacations. She lived modestly because that's what kept her invisible. That's what kept her safe. Until it didn't. The deeper the investigation went, the more it seemed Alyssa knew her time was limited. She had stopped updating her personal journal 3 weeks before her death. She'd backed up her most sensitive files to 3 separate cloud accounts under different aliases. And in a handwritten note found taped behind her bathroom mirror, she wrote, "If something happens to me, follow the trail. Start with him." Those 2 letters sealed Vincent's fate. But they also raised a chilling question. Did Alyssa know she was going to die? Detective Aaron Lowell believed she did. "I think she saw it coming," Lowell said in a later interview. She wasn't afraid of consequences, but she knew too many men with too much to lose. And one of them snapped. According to the digital forensic team, Alyssa's final recording was made on the night before her death. It lasted 46 minutes and captured a conversation between her and Vincent Hale. It was raw, emotional, desperate. In the audio, Vincent pleads with her not to go public. He accuses her of betrayal, of using him. She counters with brutal honesty, saying she never promised him anything, that he used her just as much, that they were both guilty and both expendable. At one point, Vincent says, "If I go down, I take you with me. You know that, right?" And Alyssa replies, "You're not taking me anywhere. You've already lost." That was the moment, investigators believe, that Vincent made up his mind. He returned to her apartment the next morning. They argued. Witnesses on the 22nd floor later recalled hearing furniture scraping, something heavy dropping, and a woman's scream. Less than 4 minutes after that noise, came the sound of her body hitting concrete. The prosecution would later call it a modern-day execution, carried out by a man with a bruised ego and a decaying reputation. But the real damage wasn't just in her death. It was in the files she left behind. Authorities began raiding offices. Dozens of subpoenas were issued. At least 6 officials quietly resigned within 2 weeks. The district attorney's office launched an internal probe. The Colorado Department of Justice appointed a special task force. The Alyssa Morgan case had lit a fuse under an entire judicial structure. And at the center of it all, a woman no one saw coming. A system that thought it was untouchable. And a man who believed love could be bartered for power, until it exploded in his face. It wasn't a fall. It was a removal. That's what Detective Aaron Lowell wrote in her case journal the day after Alyssa Morgan's autopsy was finalized. The forensic team had mapped her injuries with agonizing precision: fractured vertebrae, blunt cranial trauma, multiple rib breaks, deep contusions. But there was something else. A detail that kept clawing at Lowell's mind. The angle of her descent was wrong. Using a digital 3D reconstruction and a series of dummy drop tests from the exact balcony Alyssa fell from, investigators discovered a striking anomaly. Alyssa's body had landed nearly 9 feet farther from the base of the building than any test dummy. That meant only one thing. She'd been pushed. Not nudged. Not stumbled. And that single violent act shattered the final thread of Vincent Hale's carefully rehearsed lie. But even with the physical evidence piling up, Vincent wouldn't confess. Not yet. He sat in the interrogation room for hours, arms crossed, gaze lowered, answering every question with the same tired refrain. I didn't push her. She leaned. She slipped. Detectives knew better. They had the security footage of him arriving at Alyssa's apartment at 9:52 a.m., 2 cups of coffee in hand. They had the neighbor's testimony about the loud banging and crashing noises coming from Unit 2303 minutes before the fall. They had the scratch marks on his forearm, shallow, crescent-shaped, consistent with defensive wounds. And they had the voice memo from Alyssa herself, naming him as a man capable of doing something stupid. But what they didn't yet have was why. Why would a man like Vincent, once a rising star in the judicial system, a man who had everything to lose, choose to end the life of the woman he claimed to love? The answer, it turned out, lay buried not in forensics, but in psychology. Dr. Lena Morrison, a behavioral profiler with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, was brought in to analyze the nature of their relationship. What she uncovered stunned even the most experienced investigators. Vincent Hale had developed what psychologists call narcissistic overvaluation syndrome, a dangerous mental loop in which someone builds their entire self-worth around another person's approval. In simpler terms, he needed Alyssa to need him. And for years, he believed she did. He bought her jewelry, paid off her debts, wrote recommendation letters, even pushed his own marriage off a cliff, all in the name of what he thought was mutual love. But Alyssa? She never saw him that way. To her, Vincent was a tool, a gateway, a stepping stone, a man with just enough authority to matter, but not enough power to be feared. He was the perfect middleman, useful, malleable, forgettable, until he found out. During a routine phone sweep, detectives discovered that Vincent had secretly accessed Alyssa's private cloud archive using credentials she'd foolishly written in a shared notebook months earlier. What he saw shook him. Email exchanges with other officials. Affectionate messages to men she once claimed to fear. Bank transfers she swore had nothing to do with her. And worst of all, a confession draft addressed to a federal prosecutor. In it, Alyssa detailed her role in multiple contract riggings, named 5 senior state officials, and included Vincent Hale as a known participant who sought personal gain through indirect coercion. That was 2 days before she died. Vincent never told her he saw the file. He showed up with coffee just like always. Said nothing. But inside, something had cracked. He didn't want justice. He didn't want her arrested. He wanted to erase the betrayal. On the morning of the murder, they argued fiercely. Alyssa told him it was over, that she'd do whatever it took to survive, that his career, his secrets, his pride, none of it mattered anymore. She would turn state's witness. She would burn every bridge, including him. In a final chilling moment, documented in Alyssa's recovered audio files, Vincent whispered, "If you bring me down, I'll make sure you don't stand to testify." And moments later, she was gone. Silenced. When confronted with all this in a second interview, audio, physical evidence, psychological profile, Vincent finally broke. Not with rage, not with denial, but with something even colder. Resignation. He leaned back in the chair, stared at the one-way mirror, and said, "She thought she could play all of us. She forgot that some of us still know how to end a game." The room fell silent. Detectives knew what that meant. Vincent Hale had killed Alyssa Morgan not out of passion, not out of impulse, but out of deliberate vengeance. A final act of control by a man who had lost everything, career, family, identity, and blamed it all on the only person who ever made him feel significant. He believed if he couldn't be remembered as a hero, he would be remembered as the last man who ever touched her life. And in that, he succeeded. But what he didn't realize was that Alyssa had planned for her own death. In the coming weeks, her archive would unravel a statewide network of corruption, trigger resignations at the highest level of the justice system, and expose a decade of systemic abuse, favoritism, and financial crime. She wasn't supposed to talk. But now, her files were screaming. Death was supposed to end the story. But in Alyssa Morgan's case, it was only the beginning. Less than 48 hours after her body hit the concrete, detectives at the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office received an anonymous email. It contained a single line of text and a hyperlink. "You missed the real vault." The link led to a secure Dropbox hosted on a remote encrypted server. Password protected. But attached was a clue, an image of a sticky note from Alyssa's desk that read, "V is not equal to hero. Try initials plus Judgment Day." It took cybercrime analysts 2 hours to break it. VH092820. Vincent Hale. September 28th. The day Alyssa died. The vault opened. Inside were 21 folders, each labeled with a name, a date range, and an alias. Inside those folders? Everything. Detailed audio recordings of bribery deals. Screenshots of bank transactions between public officials and shell companies. Surveillance stills of after-hours meetings. Contracts flagged as pre-won before bids were ever public. And handwritten notes cross-referencing all of it, with dates, motives, leverage points. At the center of this web, one name appeared more than any other. Derek Lowen. The same Derek Lowen who had once served as Colorado's Deputy Director of Public Safety. The man whose name co-owned the luxury apartment where Alyssa was killed. And the man who, for over a decade, had used his position to grease wheels, launder influence, and push pet projects through underlayers of bureaucracy. Alyssa wasn't just his mistress. She was his asset handler. What began as a physical relationship when she was barely 29 had evolved into something far more profitable. Alyssa had helped Derek discreetly move funds through nonprofits, tech vendors, and consultancy firms, many of which existed only on paper. In return, she got promotions, immunity, and eventually power of her own. But somewhere along the line, she got tired of being a pawn. The files revealed her shift in tone around 2020. She began annotating the folders with phrases like too messy, unstable, and backdoor risk. One folder even included a list of exits with bullet points like turn state witness, leverage for immunity, leave country, plan B equals file drop. She had built a failsafe, and it had just activated. Within days, the information leaked. It started with a local blog post titled, "Who was Alyssa Morgan really protecting?" Then a whistleblower podcast released a full transcript of one of her recordings, an explosive meeting between two state procurement officers discussing inflated project budgets. Then came the televised raid. At 6:03 a.m. on a Wednesday, the FBI and Colorado DOJ descended on Mason and Field Strategies, a lobbying firm long suspected of serving as a conduit for state-level bribes. Video of agents wheeling out crates of documents aired nationwide by noon. By the evening news, 3 state officials had already resigned. The fire had begun to spread. Governor Rachel Devine was forced to call a press conference, stating, "We are cooperating fully with federal and local investigations. This is a moment of reckoning, not just for individuals, but for how business has been done behind closed doors in this state." Over the following weeks, over 40 subpoenas were issued. 8 indictments followed. The head of the State Budget Committee stepped down. A high-ranking judge took a sudden leave of absence. 2 assistant district attorneys vanished from public record entirely. Behind all this was a woman no one had noticed. Alyssa Morgan's death had torn open the roof of an empire, one built on favors, secrets, and silence. And she had done it from beyond the grave. Vincent Hale, meanwhile, sat in pretrial detention at Golden Valley Correctional Facility. His court-appointed attorney tried to plead diminished capacity. He was emotionally manipulated, they argued. This was not premeditated. But the prosecutors had the file. They had the scratch marks on Alyssa's balcony, the bruises on her arms, the voice memo from the night before. They had the camera footage, the DNA, the angle of the fall. And they had motive, plain as day. Vincent had found the confession letter. He knew he was listed. And in a final, brutal act of desperation, he tried to erase the evidence by erasing her. But instead of silencing the system, he triggered its most violent reckoning in decades. Alyssa Morgan had prepared for everything, even her own death. She knew her relationships with these men were built on fear, not loyalty. She understood the math of risk and leverage better than anyone. She didn't need to be the last one standing, just the one who pressed record. In her final backup file, investigators found a note labeled, "For whoever listens last." If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. But that doesn't mean I've lost. I just chose a different kind of justice. Courtroom 6C of the Jefferson County Judicial Center had seen its fair share of scandal. But never like this. By the time the state of Colorado versus Vincent Hale opened in January 2023, the case had already captured national attention. News trucks parked outside the courthouse. Podcasters live-streamed daily recaps. Protesters held signs, some defending Alyssa Morgan as a whistleblower, others condemning her as a manipulative opportunist. And inside the courtroom sat a man who looked nothing like the legend he once was. Vincent Hale, former judge, former prosecutor, former rising star, was now a shell. His once crisp hair was thinning, skin pale and drawn. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his suit, a suit that no longer fit. Not physically, not symbolically. He didn't look like a killer. But everyone knew what he'd done. The prosecution opened with a clear strategy: build the narrative Alyssa didn't get to finish. They told the jury about the files, the voice recordings, the fall, the physics of the body's trajectory, the cloud archive triggered after her death, the money trails, the scratch marks, the bruises. They painted Vincent not as a madman, but as a man who believed he owned Alyssa Morgan, her attention, her loyalty, her future. And when she withdrew that power from him, he did the only thing a broken narcissist could do. He erased her. It was a powerful opening. But the defense had a plan too. Led by public defender Rachel Desmond, the defense argued that Vincent was emotionally unstable, manipulated, and discarded by Alyssa, a woman with a long history of exploiting vulnerable men. They didn't deny the relationship. They didn't even deny the fight. But they denied intent. Was there a fall? Yes, Desmond told the jury. But was there a plan? A weapon? Premeditation? This was a tragedy, not a murder. The defense played on sympathy. They showed clips of Vincent's past accolades, his speeches, awards, community work. They even brought in a former clerk who described him as principled, if not always personable. They tried to shrink the murder into a moment of heat, a collapse of emotional restraint after years of professional humiliation and romantic deception. But the prosecution didn't budge. They brought in Detective Aaron Lowell, who described the precise location of Alyssa's body. Using courtroom visuals and trajectory analysis, she showed how Alyssa had been pushed with such force that her fall deviated significantly from a natural drop. Then came the audio files. The courtroom was silent as Alyssa's voice filled the room, recorded, steady, devastating. He thinks I belong to him. But I don't. And if he tries anything, this file will find someone. I just hope it's not too late. Jurors sat frozen. Some leaned forward. One closed her eyes. Vincent didn't flinch. He just looked away. The most damning moment came when prosecutors played the final recording, captured on Alyssa's hidden backup app during their last conversation. Her voice cracked. His grew cold. Alyssa, I gave you a chance to walk away, Vince. You didn't. Vincent, no. You never gave me anything. You used me. And now you want to erase me? Guess what? Two can play that game. That was all the jury needed. But there was still one piece left to play, Alyssa's final letter. It was discovered 2 weeks into the trial, stored on a flash drive hidden in a potted plant in her apartment balcony, wrapped in plastic. It was titled, If He Kills Me. In it, Alyssa named names. Not just Vincent. She named Derek Lowen, 2 sitting state legislators, a retired appellate court judge, and the exact timelines of how each had paid her to move money, hide contracts, and protect deals. The judge ruled the letter inadmissible as direct evidence, but allowed the prosecutors to use it to demonstrate her state of mind and preemptive fear of harm. It wasn't a bombshell. It was a tsunami. By week 4, the case was essentially decided. Vincent Hale never took the stand. He refused to testify. He looked smaller every day, like gravity itself was pushing him downward. When the jury returned after 6 hours of deliberation, the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Count 1, second-degree murder, guilty. Count 2, obstruction of justice, guilty. Count 3, tampering with physical evidence, guilty. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Vincent Hale was given 36 years to life in a state correctional facility. No possibility of parole until 2059. He would be 88. As the sentence was read, he showed no emotion. But in the gallery, Erin Lowell whispered to her partner. He thought killing her would end it. All he did was light the fuse. She died alone. But she didn't die unheard. In the months following the conviction of Vincent Hale, the aftershocks of Alyssa Morgan's death continued to ripple through Colorado's legal and political landscape. Her name, once absent from headlines, now lived on in podcasts, investigative reports, ethics reforms, and public debates. Some saw her as a whistleblower, others as a calculated manipulator. But no one denied this. She exposed a system. And then that system, panicked, cornered, tried to bury her. It failed. April 2023, Jefferson County Grand Jury Report released. The document was 478 pages long and detailed over a decade of corruption, fraud, and collusion between state officials, contractors, law firms, and judicial appointees. Much of the evidence had come directly from Alyssa's digital archive, the vault that was triggered after her murder. Inside were revelations that shocked even seasoned investigators. Judges accepting luxury trips in exchange for favorable rulings. Prosecutors dropping charges for campaign donors. Tech vendors inflating contracts by 300%, with funds funneled through educational grants and consulting stipends. And tying many of these threads together, her voice. In one recording, she spoke plainly. They think I'm harmless because I smile and stay late. But I listen. I keep receipts. I always have. That quote made the front page of the Denver Times. It was printed on protest signs. It was spray-painted outside government buildings. I keep receipts. It became a rallying cry. A legacy no one planned. Alyssa Morgan had never run for office. She had never made a public speech. She wasn't famous. She wasn't powerful. But she had power. And she used it quietly, collecting proof, mapping relationships, building timelines. The FBI later confirmed she had even drafted a full confession letter weeks before her death, offering to cooperate in exchange for immunity. She never got to send it, but it was saved and used. Her files directly contributed to 17 criminal indictments, 4 state resignations, 2 suspended judges, and the complete audit of all procurement contracts from 2012 to 2021. In short, she rewrote the rules of how oversight works. And all of this was accomplished not through a viral campaign, not through social media, but through one woman's meticulous, tireless preparation. The memorial that shouldn't exist. In June 2023, a small bronze plaque was quietly installed near a bench outside the Jefferson County Judicial Center. It wasn't flashy. There was no ribbon cutting, no cameras. Just a flat rectangle screwed into stone. In memory of Alyssa Morgan. For the truth she kept. And the silence she broke. Some said it was hypocritical, honoring a woman that system had failed to protect. Others said it was a beginning. A reminder. Detective Erin Lowell visited it on the first day it appeared. She left a single item on the bench, a USB drive. Empty. I figured, she later told a reporter, it was better than flowers. What we take away. It's easy to dismiss people like Alyssa. The ones who work late, ask little, stay in the background. The ones who aren't loud, but are always present. The ones who seem harmless, until they pull out the file you didn't know they had. Vincent Hale misjudged her. He thought he could erase a woman whose power came from secrets. He didn't understand that secrets, once spoken, don't die. They echo. And they pull other truths into the light. Alyssa Morgan is not a clean hero. She was complicit. She moved money. She participated in the machine. But in the end, she chose a different path. She turned her back on immunity, alliances, survival, and instead she chose the truth, even if it meant dying for it. Final words. We end not in a courtroom, not in a police station, but here, on a cold stone bench outside a building that once failed her. Where justice now sits a little heavier. Where silence now feels more dangerous. She wasn't supposed to talk. But she did. And we're still listening.